One of the interesting things about that lesson is, and this second one is very similar to it. This one's actually a little bit shorter. But one of the things about it is you end up reading a huge chunk of the book of Mark. So you end up reading, people who don't know the gospel end up reading a whole lot of one of the gospels. And so if you said, let's just sit down and read the gospel of Mark, they're going to say, no, I don't have time for that. But in this lesson, it kind of keeps them flowing and they keep listening. And you're making this case for Jesus, maybe in what I would say is kind of a non-traditional way to do it. It's not just looking at facts, but it's coming to know who Jesus is. And like I say, there are all kinds of good lessons out there. If you have one you use, then use it. I'm not trying to change your mind. If you are involved in evangelism, I want you to keep involved in evangelism. The big problem is almost no one is involved in evangelism. Very few people. And in the congregation where I am, I'm guessing I've taught this to maybe 400 people, maybe 500 people. And as far as I know, no one's ever used it, except on our staff members. So I would encourage you, if this is a method you can use it. If it's not, then use another one. Just get out there and tell people about Christ is a big thing. Whatever you choose to do. But this is helping to make the case for people to say, Jesus is relevant and I need Christ. So, this next lesson, as I told you as we begin it, if you notice in Mark chapter 1, where I write it, up there in blue, it says, Jesus cares. Mark 1, 29 through 45. And the reason I write it there in the beginning of Mark is so I can remember where it starts, because sometimes I just have a lapse and I forget. So in Mark chapter 1, in verses 29 through 45, we're going to read this in kind of little sections. And what I do here is, this is not where we're asking them questions as much as it is, you're kind of, after reading it, you're going to kind of narrate what's happening. And you can narrate it with them as they see it as well. So in Mark 1, starting in 29. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon, who we also know as Peter's mother-in-law, was in bed with a fever, and they told Jesus about her. So he went to her, he took her by the hand, and he helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. So I want you to stop and see that. First thing they do is they come to the house of Andrew and Simon, or Peter as we sometimes call him. The mother-in-law is sick, and so Jesus goes in and he heals her. And I'll never forget the time that I asked someone in a Bible study, a woman actually here in Edmond who's moved away, and she was baptized, but then eventually they moved off. I said, why did Jesus heal this woman? And she said, because he wanted somebody to get up and wait on him. She was serious. I said, I don't think that was why. Yes, it is. I said, well, it's okay. Maybe he needed some help. And so I just left it there. But that was not at all what I was expecting as the answer. The answer is that Jesus really cares. And that Jesus saw that there was hurting there. With Andrew, it was Simon, and probably with Simon's wife, and obviously with the mother-in-law. And so he cares, and so he heals her. Yes?
Does this, if you study with Catholics, does this stop them in their tracks because Peter had a mother-in-law?
I've only had one person ask me that, and that's as far as they went. I said, well, yeah, he had a mother-in-law, and then we kept moving, and they didn't say anything else. Now, if they were a devout Catholic, it would probably be an issue. Yeah. Yeah. What I would do to change that is, first of all, I would read it in a Catholic Bible, and then I'd say, let's just talk about Jesus healing this woman. And so I wouldn't get my focus off of where I was going in the power of Jesus. But I've only had that happen once, but I know certainly that could happen. Yeah. Yeah. It starts the conversation, doesn't it? Very good. Okay, so he heals her, and then in verse 32, that evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. And so then again, I tell this story or this example here. After sunset, they bring to Jesus all the sick and the demon-possessed. And I'll say, I don't know what you know about the old world, the ancient world, but probably kind of like our great-grandparents, people went to bed at sunset and got up at sunup. And so here it is, it's time to go to bed. I want you to imagine what it would be like tonight at your house. You've turned on the 10 o'clock news, and there's a knock at the door. And you jump up, don't you? What could it be? I can tell you, our little dog would go crazy. What could it be? Why would someone be at the door? Who is it? We'll look out the little peephole. Is it something dangerous? Why do you go to the door at that time of night? What does it mean? People get nervous. But not only that, if it's your friend who's over, you're thinking, it's time for bed. It's time for bed. And Jesus doesn't tell anybody that. He just heals them. And he cares about people. Jesus has compassion for people even when he's losing sleep. Okay, it goes on. Verse 35. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up. He left the house and he went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone's looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That's why I've come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out the demons. You know what it's like being up late at night? Maybe some of you have been watching Thunder games late at night, and you had to get up early the next day for work, and your head just hurts, doesn't it? Well, Jesus isn't watching basketball. He's healing people. And it's late. And so the next day, to get some peace and quiet, incidentally, houses were mostly one room. If you have all the disciples there, you can imagine what it was like, wall-to-wall people, not wall-to-wall carpet, but wall-to-wall people. Jesus sneaks out of the house while it's still dark. And he goes off to a solitary place to pray because he's needing some alone time. And he's going to give up sleep to be with his Father. And now he gets there, and Peter, he makes me laugh. "Hey, Jesus, did you know people are looking for you?" In the Greek it says there, "Duh, that's why I'm out here." It's not what he says. He says, "Yes, let's go. And let's go to other cities, because this is why I'm here. This is my mission." The mission of Jesus is to show compassion on people, to glorify his Father, but to show compassion on people. Jesus really cares about people, to the point that he will even give up his own sleep, his own peace and quiet, to help others. So then we go on down, verse 40. A man with leprosy came to Jesus and begged him on his knees, "If you're willing, you can make me clean." Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cured. Jesus cares more about others than he cares about himself. He cared more about those people at sunset than he cared about himself. He cared more about the people in the villages that didn't know when he was in the solitary place than he cared about himself. Now here he is with a leper. The way it was, you know this, your person you're studying with probably doesn't know. And so I'll just tell them. The way it was with the leper in those days, the Jews were supposed to not even look at them when they walked by because they were unclean. And the leper was supposed to put their hand or their robe up over their face so that they wouldn't have to see something so disgusting as a leper. And this leper comes to Jesus. The audacity. Comes to Jesus and says, "You can heal me if you're willing." And it says Jesus had compassion and he reached out and touched him. You see, he takes away the disease, but even more than that, he shows compassion by touching this man. Something you're going to see all through Mark. My mother, who passed away a couple of years ago, was a widow for 32 years. She told me that Sundays were the most important day of all. I said, because you get to worship? She said, yes, but something else. I said, what is it? She said, Sunday is the only day of the week that I'm touched. She said, at church, people shake my hand and they hug me. And no one else does that the rest of the week. What do you think it's like to be a leper? Maybe for weeks, or months, or years, and no one touches. Jesus, with all the compassion, reaches out and touches it and makes him heal and makes him well. Jesus cares when no one else cares. And I don't know about you, but I need somebody like that. I need Christ. Let's move over a few chapters to Mark chapter 6. Mark chapter 6 and verses 1 through 6. Jesus goes home. Jesus left there, and he went to his hometown, accompanied by his disciples. And when the Sabbath came, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many who heard him were amazed. Where did this man get these things? They asked. What's this wisdom that has been given him, that he even does miracles? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. Jesus said to them, only in his hometown, among his relatives, and in his own house, is a prophet without honor. He cannot do any miracles there except to lay his hands on a few sick people and heal them. And he was amazed at their lack of faith. Well, there's another question maybe that a Catholic person would ask you. And it would be, let's talk about that later, but let's focus on what's happening to him in his hometown is what I would say to the person. So I just keep us on track, but at the same time, acknowledge it. So I'd ask people, this is where you start asking questions. You'll see it in your books there. You ever been misunderstood by your family? How's it feel? Well, some folks, this isn't a big question. For some people, this is a really big one. Especially if they have been divorced or if they're estranged from their parents. And this is sometimes where people will cry. I know what that is because I've been there, they'll tell you. And I won't make them wallow in that. Incidentally, I've just learned in the last year that word is not waller, it's wallow. I thought it was waller. I said it from the pulpit and got corrected. That's the way I grew up in Oklahoma and the Texas Panhandle. That was the word. But I won't make them wallow in it. But the good news is Jesus understands and cares. And I need somebody like that. I'll sometimes just say that then. I need that. So you notice it goes on there from chapter 6. You'll say turn over to verses 30 through 34. This is just a short little passage where Jesus feeds the 5,000. And it says, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, that word again, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, so he began teaching them many things. You ever been too busy to eat? Boy, so much going on. Here Jesus is, let's get in the boat and go away and have lunch. There's the people. But he doesn't eat because he has compassion on people who are like sheep without a shepherd. If you've ever felt like you're just so busy you can't even stop to eat, Jesus understands that, and Jesus cares. Now let's go on to Mark chapter 14. in verses 31 and 32. This is when Jesus is praying in a garden called Gethsemane, which is where he prayed just shortly before he was arrested and then crucified. So in verses 31 and 32, or I'm sorry, in 32 through 34, they went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." You ever been so distressed that you wanted to die? You know how that feels? Everything crashing down on you. It's all there and it doesn't seem like there's any way out. If you have ever felt that, you relate with Jesus, or he relates with you, because he understands it and he cares. He has compassion. We keep hearing the same scene, and now Jesus is going to be arrested. In verses 43 through 46, just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests and the teachers of the law and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. And one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. You ever been betrayed by a friend? You know what that feels like? Somebody you think you can trust. Someone you put your confidence in, you've told your deep, dark secrets to. Someone maybe you've even spent money on and time on and your emotions and your feelings. And they betrayed you. You know what that feels like? Jesus understands it and cares because he's been there. You see what these lessons are doing? They're making Jesus relevant to the person. He understands and he cares. Go down to verse 50. Then everyone deserted him and fled. You know what it's like to be deserted? Here I don't say, do you know how it feels? Because that seems kind of silly to say, and besides that, sometimes it's getting emotional. You know what it feels like to be deserted? It doesn't feel very good. It's me against the world. Those people I could trust are gone, and it's just me. If you have ever felt deserted, Jesus understands and he cares because he's been there. So turn over in your Bibles to 55, verses 55 through 56. The chief priest and the whole Sanhedrin, that's the ruling body of Israel, were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements didn't agree. You ever had somebody lie about you? Just flat out lie. You know what it feels like, don't you? At this point in the lessons, I don't do many jokes with them or humor because it's getting really serious. You know what it's like to be lied about? People just, with a straight face, say things about you to others that aren't true. Maybe you've even been to court where someone lied about you. Jesus understands and cares because he's been right there. Skip on down to verse 65. Then some began to spit at him and blindfolded him, struck him with their fist and said, "Prophesy." And the guards took him and beat him. You ever felt abused? Ever been abused? You know what that feels like? Jesus understands that and cares. He knows what it's like to be abused. This is often a place where people don't look at me. They just keep looking down. I'm not asking them if they've been abused. I'm not trying to find out any dark secrets. I just want them to know that if they have been, Jesus relates to them. Incidentally, I hadn't thought about this until this passage, that I always have the person, if they will, read the scriptures. I don't read it. Somehow we know it better if we say it ourselves. What made me remember that is where it says prophesy here, the other person will almost always say prophecy instead of prophesy, which will tell you they don't read this very often. But I want them to read the words. Now, I sit there as casually as I can and say, you ever been, maybe you've been abused before. It hurts. Maybe it's emotional or physical or verbal. It all hurts. And Jesus understands it. And Jesus cares. Start in verse 66 through 72. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by, and when she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. You also are with the Nazarene, Jesus, she said. But he denied it. I don't know or understand what you're talking about, he said. And he went out into the entryway. And when the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, this fellow is one of them. Again, he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. He began to call down curses on himself, and he swore to them, I don't know the man you're talking about. Immediately the rooster crowed the second time, and then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. He broke down and he wept. You ever had a friend act like they didn't know you? Friends see you in the grocery store, at a ball game, and they just turn and they go the other way. I don't even know you. If you've ever gone through that, you relate to what Jesus went through. Jesus understands what it's like to be denied by his friends, even those who had made a vow to him that they would never leave him. Those words are pretty important for people sometimes who've been divorced, especially. Peter said, I will never let them kill you, Lord. I will never leave you. And then you see where he is. If you have ever had someone act like they didn't know you when you needed them the most, then the good news is Jesus understands and he cares. We go over to chapter 15, verses 16 through 20. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and they called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, and then they twisted together a crown of thorns, and they set it on him. They began to call out to him, Hail, King of the Jews! And again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and they put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. People ever made fun of you? And what it's like when people make fun of you, maybe because of the way you look, or what you wear, or what you don't have, or what you have. Jesus understands what it's like to be made fun of. The Son of God, the one from glory, as we say, knows what it's like. He relates. He understands, and he cares. Go on down to verse 31, 32. In the same way, the chief priest and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. Let this Christ, this King of Israel, come down from the cross, that they may see and believe. And those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. Know what it's like to be insulted? Jesus knows what it's like to be insulted. And he understands and he cares because he's been there. Skip right down to verse 33 and 34. At the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Ever felt forsaken? If you have, Jesus knows what that's like. Because he felt forsaken. Sometimes when I do this, as people, depending on where we are or what the situation is, I'll be a little bit more, I try to explain it a little bit more realistically, the cross, than maybe they see just in the words. But you understand probably from sermons and classes in your own study that in this audience, that when you would breathe in, you could almost not breathe out. Excuse me. So you could get air in, but you couldn't get air out. And the way the cross was, and the pictures we see of the cross, Jesus is there on the cross, and he has that little footstool at the bottom, kind of put his feet on, and then he's wearing the little loincloth. Well, what we know about people being crucified is, first of all, there was no loincloth. He's naked. He's naked in front of all those people, and I don't know if it makes it any more disgusting, but he's naked in front of his mother, his best friend, and his aunt. And that little foot thing's not there. Instead, his feet are nailed there. There was a piece of wood, but from what we understand about other crucifixions, there was a piece of wood, but actually it would have been like a dowel rod, more like that, more like a wooden spike that would go in that you would sit on to rip your body apart. So while Jesus is on the cross, he takes in air. He tries to take in more air. It's not like he's just talking like this. Isn't it a wonderful day? Eloi, Eloi. See what he's doing? My God, why have you forsaken me? This is the cross. It's also incredible at the cross in that same way. Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. You see, this is Jesus. Whatever I've been through, he understands and he cares. He's been there. He gets it. He gets me. When it seems like nobody else gets me, when my parents don't get me, or my wife doesn't get me, or my husband doesn't get me, or my work doesn't get me, Jesus gets me because he's gone through all that. It all makes sense to him. And I need Jesus. Is this all making sense to y'all? Often when I get right here, and we're going to take a very short break. I've gone through this pretty quickly for you because I was worried at the beginning I wouldn't be able to get it all in. But often when I'm here, I say, you know what? If you'd like, let's just go right into the next lesson. And I don't say, come back next week. And the reason I do is because we are really thinking about our sin and our need for a Savior. And so I'll say, let's go into the next one. And the next one is where we start talking about, it's still similar, but it's more traditional in some ways, in that we're talking about what you need to do to be saved. Let's take a very short break. You haven't had very long. Is 5 minutes good? Okay.